Hello and welcome to the webinar, Making Azure Sentinel Work for Your Security Operations. My name is Lori, and I'll be your co-moderator today. This webinar should be about 60 minutes. We're broadcasting this webinar through Teams live event, and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's webinar is being recorded on behalf of Microsoft, and participation in the webinar indicates your consent to being included in the recording, which will be available to you within just a couple days, including the presentation deck. Please look for a follow-up email shortly. Should you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. We have experts standing by to answer your questions. We thank you in advance for your patience as the presenters work through your questions. In addition, we thank you for adhering to the Microsoft Digital Code of Conduct that is posted in the chat window. Now on to the presentation. Ben, over to you.
Great. Thank you. I'm hearing a bit of an echo. I don't know if anyone else is, but if you can, if we're able to sort that out, that'd be great. So welcome everyone to this webinar on making Azure Sentinel work for your security operations. I'm Ben Chant, Global Product Marketing Manager at Cyberproof, and today I'm joined by two highly regarded experts in this field. Cyril Wassam, Chief Security Advisor in EMEA at Microsoft, and Jamin Thomas, Head of Security Solutions and Architecture at Cyberproof. Guys, would you like to start with the introductions?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ben. So my name is Cyril, and I'm a security advisor for Chief Information Security Officers of large organizations across the Europe, Middle East, and Africa time zone. I engage in different discussions, and including modernizing security operations centers, and that includes projects where Azure Sentinel is playing a key role.
Hey, good morning. This is Jamin Thomas. I run the security services and solutions for Cyberproof. I've been with Cyberproof for almost 4 years now. Our team is responsible for designing, architecting, and building highly scalable, robust operations monitoring infrastructure for our customers. We have architected and deployed Azure Sentinel for a number of our customers. Most of these deployments had some unique problems and challenges. That some of those are, from data collection and pre-processing issues to, alignment with compliance requirements and cost optimization. So I'll share some of these experiences in this session. And previous to Cyberproof, I worked in similar roles at Symantec, Verizon, and Deloitte. Over to you, Ben. Thanks.
Thanks. So today we're just going to go through the agenda. First of all, we'll just go through a quick introduction into Azure Sentinel. Just going over the traditional on-prem SIEM challenges and benefits of Azure Sentinel, which we'll cover. We'll then go through some of the key challenges, and these are a few key ones that we particularly see across the market at the moment when customers are adopting Azure Sentinel. And then we'll look at what we call the key layers of implementing Azure Sentinel into your SOC. If you've been on one of our webinars before, we have gone through what we call the key layers of a smarter SOC, which includes how we integrate with Azure Sentinel. But for this presentation, we're actually going to go into a bit more depth into those layers, showing a little bit more information around best practices for integrating with Azure Sentinel, from the data collection area to analytics, right the way through to orchestration, automation, collaboration, and then how you can collaborate with the right skill sets at the right time. And then finally, we'll go through a reference story where Cyberproof and Microsoft have actually taken these approaches and gone through some of these challenges as well. So Cyril, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So we wanted to start with a a look back at the traditional SIEM, and in order to understand why Azure Sentinel was created as a cloud-native SIEM. Here we try to list a number of challenges that you may find when you have a traditional SIEM on premises. The first challenge probably is to maintain it and make sure that it's always up to date. Without any form of log collection interruption when you need to do the updates and the upgrades. Scalability is also a challenge and can increase the cost, especially if you want to keep the high availability at the same time. Another challenge is the fact that we are now more and more using mobility and cloud, especially with this notion of remote work that has become something that is expected now from any company. And while doing that, it's hard to have the right visibility if you're not collecting from all the places, including the cloud. And treating the cloud logs presents challenges, not only in the ingestion phase, but also if you want to hunt, if you want to normalize the data so that you can make sense of it. And on top of that, the traditional SIEM do not come with automation capabilities. This require additional components that you need to include, and that would be nice if you could basically have a SOAR directly from the SIEM. Simplicity of use also sometimes is not really something obvious, and there could be some also performance limitations, especially when you reach the level of events per second that have been planned, and therefore that's why we wanted to offer something different with Azure Sentinel. And Ben, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So Azure Sentinel is a cloud-native SIEM, and it has no-brainer advantages based on this notion of being born into the cloud. Auto scalability is definitely one of its benefits. The ability to collect the logs from cloud sources comes as a no-brainer. You don't have to send the telemetry from the cloud back and forth between your on-prem and the cloud. So you can respect this data gravity notion of collecting closer to where the data is generated. Some key log sources are free from the Microsoft ecosystem and the alerts. But there is more, definitely more. So if you want to do a DevOps deployment, you can include the ability to collect the logs in Azure Sentinel as code, infrastructure as code. It's largely distributed. It's always kept up to date also. So it's very important if you are in an evergreen position, you will start to realize how easy it is to not have a team that is focusing on making sure that the infrastructure works, but that you get all the new innovation once they are released, and it's very, very easy to adopt and get more value from the service. And obviously it has a cloud native schema, which means that it can ingest the new sources of log very easily. And that's what makes it important. And what you see at the bottom is of this slide is the representation of the things you can do with Azure Sentinel. So it comes from the very wide visibility across the enterprise, the ability to correlate logs to do analytics. If you have a security event that requires you to hunt for what happened in the past, or if you want to find if adversaries are in your information systems, we provide you hunting capabilities. You have the ability to investigate, of course, incidents, which are a collection of alerts. And finally, we provide you automation because we believe that we need to augment the productivity of skilled humans because there is a shortage of security talents on the market.
Great. Thanks, Cyril. So Jamie, one of the things that we hear from clients is that they need help managing the costs of Sentinel, particularly with the data ingestion and retention costs. And we've got a slide here just to represent that, and I'm wondering whether you could just take us through that, and then we can move a little bit later on to the actual approaches to be able to manage and optimize that.
Yeah, sure. If you look at the current kind of on-premises traditional SIEM, it's pretty clear that it's not always cost effective. In addition to the hidden costs that you see in managing, optimizing, and maintaining a traditional SIEM, you always see organizations factor in solution sizing and license requirements way higher than what is normally needed. Many customers have made a lot of upfront investments in infrastructure and licenses to factor for the growth. And in many cases, that may not be required in the first place. So having said that, we could also end up spending more than what we are really planning to in Azure Sentinel if you don't manage the data volumes and the ingestions carefully. One of the advantages of Sentinel is that it actually provides, like Cyril said, that cloud scale and ingestion ability without limit. So also with the availability of these native connectors, organizations can stream data into Sentinel with very minimal effort. Yeah. So this is why I think it's really important, particularly in the cases of complex organizations where they manage multiple workspaces. You carefully look at how architect the solutions. What kind of information that you need to monitor, where are you going to kind of store this and stuff, and we'll cover that later in the session there.
Yeah, and Jamin, you raise an important point here, because ingestion is not just a cost issue, right? But it's also a use case quality issue. So from our side, certainly most of the value that we see in security monitoring is generated from those from the quality of use cases. So for example, you can't afford to rely solely on default use cases, but rather continuously develop and optimize them to make sure you're detecting the right types of attack that are targeting those assets with the most risk, right? But
yeah, certainly.
Yes. And I'd say that another thing that we see is that use cases are often referred to as not just referred to as detection rules, but this often falls short on the response steps as well with customers, where they don't also include relevant enrichments, what should be automated versus manual, and ultimately the response needs to be customized to the assets that need to be protected, the risk window, etc. So I don't know if you've got a particular view on this as well, which you cover on the next slide.
Yeah, so if you just move to the next slide, then Ben, so we'll quickly go through that. So so maybe Cyril, if you can just take this and explain some of those challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to describe on this particular slide is what you should not do and that you may be tempted to do. What we see sometimes is that we see organizations that think about what log sources do I have, how do I make sure that I can ingest them in Azure Sentinel, and then which technology integrations do I need, and what processes can I use to manage the alerts and incidents. So somehow you're looking at what can I do and trying to find value in all the things that you have managed to do. When in fact, this leads to noisy alerts with no chance to process, no prioritization on the potential impact and business risk for your critical assets, and trying to monitor everything, because you have this promise of like infinite scalability of the cloud, and you're like, okay, let's just ingest everything and we'll figure out afterwards what we can do. So the idea is, first of all, yeah, it's good to use the standard use cases, but sometimes you want really to reflect on what is your need. You need to reverse the thinking to start with what is important for you, and then from there decide what you want to ingest and what kind of scenarios you want to cover. And Jamin, maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, certainly. So so if you just move to the next one, Ben. So the typical process, I think, we should start actually with that top-down approach, starting to understand what are my critical assets and what are the business applications that I'm trying to protect. From there, we need to then define what is that threat profile that I have, understand what kind of malicious actors will be targeting my organizations and the assets that I have. And once you have that view, you will understand what will be the detection gaps. And frameworks like the MITRE attack framework is something that you can actually use to baseline your current capabilities. It gives you a very clear understanding of the different tactics and techniques that an attacker could use, and the tools that they have. So based on that, you will be able to have a very clear understanding of where you are in terms of your detection ability, and what are the things that you need to do in order to kind of build that coverage. And then it's all about, once you detect something, how efficiently can I actually respond to that? And this is where the use case comes into picture, and use case for cyberproof. And understanding that is really important, because for us, a use case starts with what a threat scenario is. And a threat scenario is something that may lead to a negative impact to a business. There are one or more methods that a malicious actor could use to cause that negative impact. So when building a threat detection and analytic rule, what we are trying to do is we are trying to understand these methods that an attacker could use in order to compromise a system or an asset. So that's what we build that as a rule in the SIEM. So once the rule is triggered and an alert is generated based on the raw telemetry or event data that we collect, we then need to add additional context. And this is what we do in the enrichment. More mature SOC operations actually does it automatically. So you get asset information from CMDB, user details from Active Directory, vulnerability data, threat intelligence. All that is then added into the alert, providing much more context to that security analyst to make that informed decision. Then comes playbook, and playbooks are really important because it provides that structured way for the analyst to respond to a threat, and it gives that standard guideline on how a specific type of incident should be managed end to end. And automation then provides that efficiency in the way a SOC handles incident. And in order to make sure that we have the right level of automations, there is a number of integrations that we have to do with customers' environment to different systems and technologies that they have to provide that end-to-end effective SOC operations. And finally, it's also about building advanced visualization, because certain patterns or threat behaviors is not easily found using an alert or a security event rule. So this is why visualization comes into picture, and is really important. We could actually create like a specific dashboard that monitors for an application's behavior, or a periodic report that kind of sends customer stakeholder that you can send to customer stakeholder and get them to review for any specific patterns or stuff that they see. So that's kind of end to end, how you look at from threat scenario all the way to kind of automatically responding to a specific incident.
And Jamin, actually, I just want to ask you specifically about this concept of the use case, because there seems to be, some people may say it's quite a complex process, but it's certainly something we need to do to make sure that we're getting the most quality and the most quality out of that security monitoring, but also thinking about how we respond from regarding customized types of scenarios that we may face from attacks. So is there specific resources or management process or some kind of user interface that's required to do this?
Yeah, no, I think like you said, although it seems simple, it's not that simple, isn't it? Because when you are looking at trying to build that very much aligned to the organization's specific threat profile and the risk appetite, it's really important to make sure that you tailor it as much as possible. And you also need to build this in an agile manner, because the threat scenarios and the landscape kind of keep constantly changing, and you have to adapt to that. And this is why having a robust factory-like approach, where you are able to create these scenarios and requirements in an agile manner, build that in a factory-like approach, and then have those producers, which are your use cases, which is something that you could repeat and reuse for many of the organizations. So that is something that we in Cyberproof have done very, very well, where we have built a use case factory, and then the outcome of those, which are the use cases, is something that we can actually manage in a kind of a catalog, and that could be then taken and easily adaptable to different customers and the scenarios that they're looking for.
Great, thanks. And I want to come back to this cost optimization point as well, because we started covering a little bit around the challenges, and then we moved into actually how this links very relevantly to log ingestion, and then how to not kind of just focus on logs, but also more specifically on use cases. So I want to bring us back to that cost optimization point, specifically how we can manage that. Can you just take us through that a little bit? Because I know we're going to go through on the next slide specific method that we maybe used in our experience anyway.
Yes, certainly, Ben. So if you look at so ingesting more than what you can chew is probably one of the things that we kind of tend to do. We want to kind of send everything into the kind of data lake or analytics engine, isn't it? And sometimes it's based on two things. One is you look at is that aligned to the compliance requirement, because there are compliance needs which ask organizations to store data for 2 years, maybe 7 years. So there is one of that, a compliance read. The second one is like having the right level of visibility and coverage. So this is why it's important to make sure that you kind of have the right level of customization of the data that you collect. You have to clean the data, you have to filter it and cleanse it, and take the ones that you really think are important in order to kind of perform the activity that you need. And in some cases, especially with native connectors, aggregation of data is not always possible within Sentinel. And this is why you need to also look at what is the right way to actually bring data in. And the other important factor is once you get the data into the environment, there are different options to store them. So log analytics, for example, provides a real-time analytics capability, and that is what we call a hot storage. It can actually help you to store data for up to 2 years in there. Azure Data Explorer again is something that you could use for a bit more cost-effective long-term storage. It can use the same KQL and machine learning models that you obviously get in Sentinel and log analytics, but it's a slightly cheaper option, and we call it warm storage, and you can store data in ADX for up to 99 years. And blob storage is another opportunity, to store data for long term and leverage the same kind of KQL and machine learning opportunities as well. Data lake storage is again, so there are different options where you can actually store these, and in some cases, you can send the data to Azure Log Analytics, Sentinel Log Analytics for real-time correlation, and store up to 90 days. And then for longer storage, you opt for technologies like ADX and blob storage and data lake for that long-term retention and compliance needs.
Great, thanks, Jamin. Now, Cyril, I wanted to ask you specifically around this concept that we see a lot from customers when looking to help them adopt Azure Sentinel. They may have existing technologies in place, existing SIEMs in place, or existing on-premise infrastructure, for example, and they're wanting to move to a more cloud-native approach. So, what do you recommend is the right sort of steps to take when doing that migration?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. What we do recommend, and if you can go to the next slide, it will make it visual, is to approach it depending on what your existing infrastructure is and what your target is. For instance, Azure Sentinel is a full SIEM for your enterprise needs, so you may have a target of completely migrating to Azure Sentinel. But in most cases, what we see is that customers will adopt Azure Sentinel side by side with their existing SIEM, and they will bring to Azure Sentinel the use cases, the log sources that they are not covering well or not covering at all today. And that's typically everything that is related to the cloud. And here, again, there are two ways of approaching that. Either you're going to be hybrid as a transitional state, or you're going to be targeting to be hybrid at the end with a side-by-side combination of your traditional on-premises SIEM and the cloud-native SIEM. We've been working with customers doing both approaches with Cyberproof, and even for those going for the full cloud-native architecture, they started to basically transition the ingestion from their traditional SIEM to Sentinel, but at the same time adding new capabilities with the cloud.
Great, thanks. In terms of because it seems like can often be quite a complex approach to take, and sometimes need specific skill sets, right, to be able to carry out this migration as well. So, so Jamin, are there specific skill sets that are needed for this, or is this a matter of bringing in the right skills, or going through the right kind of certifications and training?
Indeed, isn't it, Ben? So if you look at what is really required from a skills perspective, I kind of see this as four kind of key roles. First of all, you have to have a strong program management and governance. This is to make sure that you kind of drive that through that agile delivery model, ensuring that the timelines are met. What we have seen with customers is that they do have specific timelines and challenges in terms of meeting a specific migration, or in some cases the licenses or contract with existing kind of service providers are kind of coming to an end. So having that right program governance and the ability to the people who are running that should have a good understanding of the technology stack, the capabilities and challenges that the solution like Sentinel provides, and manage that effectively. The other role that you should be looking at is especially around engineering, because bringing data into Sentinel also requires a certain amount of understanding and skills to ensure that the right level of data is collected, and you need to make sure that when data comes in, it actually comes in the right format where you want to kind of clean it and stuff like that if that is required. And especially when you deal with on-premise environment, what you have seen is that you may have to depend on some third-party collectors or build some custom parsers. So a strong engineering team is really required, who can actually also think out of the box and use technologies like PowerShell and other scripting solutions to build those custom parsers and collection capabilities. When it comes to content specialist, again, this for me is a really important role, because once the data comes in, you need to be able to build those analytical rules, and those visualizations. And this is where have people who have got real in-depth understanding of KQL and machine learning and how to build those kind of visualizations is really important, and also support with creating automation using Power Apps like Logic Apps, for example, it comes into play. And then finally, security analysts. So we have to make sure that the team can really use all these in-depth capability that Sentinel provides in terms of walking through a complete incident life cycle, and whether that is managing in different Azure stack, including Defender and other solutions. So that is also something that you need to look at. And Cyril, I know that there is a certification that Microsoft released recently about SOC analyst training, isn't it? Do you want to talk
Yeah, absolutely.
about that?
Like 2 weeks ago during the Microsoft Ignite 2021, we announced the availability of a new certification for Security Operation Analyst Associate. And the idea, as you said, is to make sure that you can train and recognize your people who are efficient and skilled for the SIEM of Microsoft Azure Sentinel and the XDR, which is the Microsoft Defender.
Thanks. And I wanted to now move on to this concept of the key layers, right? And it's something, as I said before, we have covered in the past, and you'll see it on some of our blogs as well, some of our thought leadership content. But today I want to spend a bit more time going to each of those individual layers. So, for example, going to the data collection process, right the way through to the analytics side of things and the data collection. Orchestration, enrichment, and then right the way through to actually managing those use cases in the right way, and investigating with the right skill sets as well to then remediate those threats as quickly as possible. So perhaps, Jamie, do you want to start on the data collection side?
Yeah, sure. So, I mentioned before, we should look at this as a kind of a risk-based top-down approach. You need to understand when you're defining data sources, what is that we are trying to kind of detect. So what kind of assets that we are trying to protect. So from there, you will have a clear understanding of the information and the events that we need to collect. And also when we are looking at collecting data sources, we also need to try and look at prioritizing that. One of the approaches would be to start looking at the data sources that have native connectors in place. Yeah, and that provides immediate value by kind of giving that immediate visibility. And you can also turn on some of the out-of-the-box queries that comes with that native connectors. Once you kind of look at that, then you also have a number of other data that you need to bring in, and this is where we need to look at what kind of collection methods that we have available. Obviously, a native connectors is and Azure monitoring agents that is provided by Sentinel is obviously our first go-to place. But we also need to understand that there is a lot of additional options that we have, from ability to create PowerShell scripts and Azure functions to bring in data in as well as codeless collections, such as using logic apps. So this is really important, and also it gives you more flexibility to bring in data through third-party apps like Logstash, where you can actually bring in data in and also do a lot of pre-processing of that data to make sure that the information that you collect and store is something that is really useful to the purpose that you're looking for. And coming to that pre-processing, it's really important because it helps to a certain extent, reduce the overall cost of the data that we collect and store. We also have the ability to kind of filter and the data and add additional enrichment and tagging, because in some cases you may want to add specific information to into the log to for various purposes. One of the use cases could be applying role-based access control per data. So you could do that by tagging specific data that comes in. Also, we need to make sure that the events and telemetry that we collect can be stored in the right place. So one of the options that you could do is, as you collect data, you could send data to log analytics for real-time processing, and at the same time send the data to a bit more cost-effective solution like ADX or data lake for long-term storage. So that is also an option when you actually start looking at data collection and pre-processing at that side as well.
Great, thanks, Jamin. And Cyril, how about the advanced analytics side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the part which is going to do the correlation, and it's going to raise alerts and create incidents. So a part of the best practices is to, of course, leverage the analytic rules which are already available. You have a screenshot on the right here showing the different rules templates which are available. Obviously, we have GitHub detections that we share publicly, so feel free also to go there and get more. You can adapt this detection, as we mentioned earlier, and one of the things we want to encourage is the sharing, so that as a community of defenders, we can all benefit from this. The step that is called turn on UEBA is about making machine learning study the behavior of users and entities. That means user accounts, machines, servers, and so on. This comes by default, and you can leverage that to use some form of machine learning to help you do better detections. Another aspect which is available in Sentinel is called Fusion. This is an algorithm, a machine learning algorithm that is going to bring different alerts together by recognizing that they are part of the same incident. And again, the idea is to supplement the human analysts so that they don't have to spend too much time figuring out that all these different alerts coming from different domains, such as email protection, identity, SaaS application, infrastructure, EDR, NDR, and so on, firewalls, are all in fact the same incident. So it's going to help group that, and you have an example here at the bottom right called anomalous login followed by suspicious Office 365 mailbox forwarding. So if you see forwarding in a mailbox, that's already something suspicious. But if before you had someone log on with a username and this logon was suspicious, that's probably the same attack, and that's how it's regrouped together. And what you see at the bottom left is the UEBA engine, the analytics, behavior analytics engine, which is bringing not only the different sources of data that comes from Sentinel, but also connecting the dots with what's coming from the identity layer in Azure AD.
Thanks, Cyril. And you know, the next piece here, which we want to show everyone is this use case factory process. So, Jamin, I'll let you cover this in a second, but I just want to also let everyone know that you were probably wondering what the term use case factory was when we referred to it slightly early on. This was one of the challenges that we covered earlier, where customers may have default set of use cases, but actually they may only be thinking of it in terms of detection rules, maybe some enrichment, and solely focusing on the SIEM, right? But we want to look beyond that. We want to make sure we're identifying the critical assets first, but that requires a process in place. It also requires, as you referred to, Jamin, certain level of resource in terms of engineers who may need to build those use case kits, and then we need to be able to deploy it, test it, etc. So this is what we mean by that use case factory, and it's very much built on a kind of software development process and principles for it to be more agile. So, Jamin, can you take us through what actually goes into that input analysis phase versus actually building that use case request and then constantly developing and optimizing it?
Yeah. So first of all, I think use cases and having a capability to continuously improve the detection and responsibility is extremely important, isn't it? So and I think that's what use case factory does. If I try to put it really simply, it helps customers to baseline what they currently have in terms of their ability to detect threats and respond to it, and then continuously improve that based on the different threat landscape and scenarios that they kind of encounter. So like I said before, when we look at use case factory, we need to start looking at from a threat scenario perspective. So what are the kind of scenarios that could lead to a negative impact to the organization? And in order to understand that, there are few things that you could look at. So one of them is, and a very proven, something that is a lot of customers have adopted, is the migrated framework. Now you can use migrated framework to try and understand what are the tactics and techniques that your organization can really detect and respond to. That kind of gives a very good baseline, and the gaps will help the organizations to understand, how do we then start looking at building those coverage and building those use cases. The other important factor is threat intelligence, and we at Cyberproof, we have some amazing talent, some of the nation state experts who continuously looks at the dark web and marketplaces to see some of the trends out there. What is the kind of new techniques and tools that some of these malicious users are kind of coming up with. What are the new vulnerabilities that are trending? So those kind of information is very useful for the team to start looking at creating new threat detection rules and logic. The other one is security monitoring. So when you look at the information that you get from your customers, there will be a lot of areas where the security analyst will be thinking that either is suspicious or things that they are actually thinking as a deviation from normal. So those kind of information could be an input into again creating a new threat detection logic. And then finally, it's about simulation. How do you kind of simulate various attack techniques and try and really understand what is the are you thinking that your current capabilities are strong? So when you kind of start simulating or doing some red teaming and testing like that, you will really have a good understanding of what are your control gaps and weaknesses. So all these kind of inputs can then go into what we call a kind of a use case forum, where you have a strong governance and an agile mode of kind of bringing that request in, defining what that actually means, and then sending it through what we call that use case factory. And the factory actually consists of different kind of assembly lines, so to say. It starts with the design, where you kind of look at what exactly the outcome of that use case should be, and from there you go in and build different components for that. Starting with the detection rules, defining the playbooks and the automation logic, and then making sure that that is actually indeed working as you expect. And for every customer, their operating environment is different. So that testing and fine-tuning of those should be very much done at a customer kind of environment, and it needs to be very much tailored to the customer. And that is where the agile process is really important and comes into picture. And once this is all done, you kind of send it into what we call the operation of operating it, and also putting it into what we call a use case repository or a catalog, which is then something could be reused for other customers as well. So one thing that you build for one customer could be easily repurposed for other customers, and fine-tuned it for specific needs for that customer. So that is that, and you also need to look at how you kind of manage this in an agile manner in a CI/CD process, because sometimes you have to kind of really look at as a strong application development methodology.
Yeah, thanks, Jamin. And really, the whole point of this, right, is to you can see at the top left and the heading is to be agile, because it's all well and good trying to create the right type of use cases that consist of those detection rules and that consist of the right response steps. But obviously, you need to make sure you're developing those and tuning those at the pace of the changing attack landscape as well, right? So incredibly important there. So let's move over to the orchestration, automation, and collaboration layer. Can you start with this, Damon, and then what we'll do after this is actually look at it, all these layers put together as an example architecture.
Yeah, and the orchestration, that layer is really important, because when it comes to organizations, large organizations, you'll see that they have got multiple technologies and tools, and often you will see that they are not actually operating in a harmonious manner. So an orchestration layer is kind of helping to bring all those different technologies together and providing that what we call that single pane of glass. So you can bring in data from multiple tools, make it all work in a kind of an effective manner. And especially when customers have got multiple SIEM technologies, this is very important because they would like to kind of have that seamless journey between one SIEM to the other. So that is again one of the things that the orchestration layer really helps with. The other thing is around how do you drive some of those process efficiencies. So one of the things that you have to look at is how do you standardize some of these processes that you have within the SOC, and then look at how to improve that. And this is where digital playbooks comes into play. And digital playbooks can also help with automating stuff. So activities or actions that are defined in the playbooks could be automated using specific integrations that you have. And mature SOC operations, and definitely within cyberproof, we have what we call a virtual analyst. So we call it SIEMO. And what SIEMO actually does is it actually kind of act as another analyst within the SOC. When alert comes in, SIEMO can actually go in and take a look at it even before a human can actually kind of get a chance to look at it. So when SIEMO looks at an alert, SIEMO can actually kind of enrich that alert with additional information, whether that is going in and fetching that from an Active Directory or a vulnerability tool, or it could be to do some sort of containment activity. So if it found that there is a specific IP that is linked to a malicious domain or a blacklisted group, SIEMO can actually make those actions to block that IP or disable a user or isolate a machine to immediately contain that problem, and also then take further actions, whether that is notifying somebody or creating an incident ticket in a kind of a customer's specific ticketing system. So automation is also really important, and again, the orchestration layer does that really efficiently. And then the final thing is about that visibility, because many customers really love to see the MSSP is providing more clarity, more visibility into the operating environment, and that provides more confidence, and more customers really wanted to kind of have more authority and power in the way that they actually manage their cyber requirements. So providing that complete transparency and that real time means to collaborate when they see a security incident is also important. So this is also something that both with Azure Sentinel and Teams that we can provide, as well as we Cyberproof already have our own technology that provides that kind of capability for real-time alert investigations and collaborations together with customers and the SOC experts.
Yeah, thanks, Jamin. I think that's one of the key points, isn't it? And we'll show in the next slide as well that entire architecture, but being able to then have a single pane of glass that we can use, such as the Cyberproof Defense Center that integrates natively with the logic apps for automation, but integrates that with SIEMO, for example, our virtual analyst bot, who can then take those actions, can integrate with those different Microsoft capabilities, with the workbooks, with reporting, with playbooks, with logic apps, and carry out those responses proactively as well, but also ensuring that transparency in activities. So just looking at the time, we've got about 10 more minutes, so I want to quickly just go through this architecture slide. Can you just summarize this in a couple of minutes if you can, James, and then we'll move on to an example.
Yeah, sure. So I think the fundamental point here is that building a security monitoring infrastructure is always very complex. But if you look at it as a layered architecture, so what we walk through from a data collection layer, making sure that you have the right level of data that is collected, a strong analytical layer that helps with not only just for real-time correlation, but also for long-term threat hunting and investigation. And then that central piece, which is the the security orchestration and automation layer, that brings all these different technologies together. And what then keeps that turning is actually that use case factory kind of concept that continuously baselines and improves the organization's capability going forward. And all that will be managed really well by the the SOC operations, which is the collection of highly expert resources to drive this. So that's how I would expect kind of a robust and strong architecture to help organizations to drive it.
Thanks, Jamin. Sorry, I had to mute myself for a second there. There was some background noise, so apologies to anyone. Can you still hear me now?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So perhaps Cyril, you can start us off just quickly covering the key sort of KPIs we should be looking for, and Jamin, obviously feel free to chip in as well.
Yeah, so definitely the idea is that you need a number of KPIs in order to measure the progress you're making and being in this agile and continuous improvement loop. And here we're listing just a few of them that are interesting to monitor, such as the indicators around visibility on coverage, time and efficiency and accuracy. One of these indicators we use at Microsoft directly is the one which is just in the middle, called number of incidents managed automatically, because we want to make sure that we don't have analysts doing the same thing again and again and again, and therefore if something is a recurring kind of event, it needs to be more automated at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that as well, so I think the fundamental thing is we are measuring the capability based on how much are we kind of helping an organization to reduce the overall risk. Yeah, so that's fundamentally what we are trying to do. So how much can we help detect the threats? So what is the coverage that we have, and how much we can actually kind of reduce the risk? And that kind of is a combination of the visibility, the time and efficiency that we actually do in order to respond, and then finally the accuracy at which we kind of deal with things. So that's how we kind of manage that.
Great, thank you both. Now let's take a look at this in terms of an actual use case scenario or a case study. So I mean, this is one particular case study that we're particularly proud of. It's something which Microsoft and Cyber together have worked on. We see this as being arguably one of the largest deployments in the world, and that's what we've been told by customer as well. So perhaps, Jamie, you can start off by just taking us through some of the challenges, as well as what the particular approach was, some of the complexities we had to navigate with deploying Azure Sentinel, particularly for multiple entities within the organization. Some of the things we learned, and then perhaps go into the actual architecture that we designed for this customer.
Yeah, sure, Ben. Yeah, so I think so this is this is one of the organizations who are highly regulated and require a lot of specific data compliance and privacy requirements. Although they operate as a global company, with over 60 countries where they operate in. The challenge was that like probably most organizations, it was a very kind of disconnected ecosystem with complex infrastructure, and every subdivisions or entities within the organization had different maturity in terms of how they manage cybersecurity. And what we were trying to what we helped the customer with was to help them build a highly scalable solution in the cloud that actually helps them with defining what they call the next generation cyber defense capability, building the infrastructure in cloud, working with Microsoft to have using the Azure stack. Some of the challenges also, if you look at it, is things like they currently had a kind of an on-prem what we call a traditional SIEM infrastructure that kind of grew as the company kind of acquired and grew, and that suddenly became a high overhead to manage and maintain, and also with the adoption of the the cloud environment, it was more challenging to start maintaining the or having the visibility into the cloud, and also lack of skills because of all the modern application development capabilities. Some of the new features and capabilities that Azure Sentinel provides. So again, managing that and then building this as a repeatable process that they could then kind of roll out for all the other subdivisions within the organization. So it was, if I try to summarize that, it was one, probably looking to build a true next gen auto scale kind of solution in the cloud. That is one of the challenges. The second was, how do you improve your visibility and still have the right level of control of what's actually going on. And the third thing was like, how can I make this repeatable, and make sure that I can manage it from a cost optimized point of view as well. And then what we have done for the customer is, obviously, we actually built a highly scalable solution in the cloud, using Azure Security Stack. We leveraged Azure Sentinel and all the components that actually comes supporting that. One other thing that we kind of solved as a unique problem for them was, the ability to collect data from various environments. The challenge was, with distributed environment and operations, we had to make sure that there was right level of data privacy and compliance that is needed. So we had to make sure that we apply all these compliance needs and regulatory requirements in order to collect and store the data, provide all that as a single pane of glass, using our own capability, which we call the Cyberproof Defense Center platform, that fits nicely into the Azure Security Stack, and then provide that as a fully managed service, using Cyberproof Defense Centers and working together with the customer SOC, having that full transparency and that visibility that customer was looking for. One additional challenge that we also solved was, managing the cost, because the customer was actually kind of looking at 4 to 6 terabytes of data ingestion coming in, and being regulated, they had a need to store these data for a longer period of time. So this is where we also help the customer, working very closely with Microsoft, building some innovative solution in order to make sure that the data that we collect for real-time analytics and the data that we collect for long-term retention for compliance purposes is very well managed using analytics and ADX. And maybe, Cyril, you can just add a few words to that as well.
Yeah, obviously this is a very complex scenario, as you said, and the cost optimization was important. I want to mention that the 6 terabytes that you mentioned are the volume for every day. So that's why it can ramp up the cost quite quickly. And so the basic concept is that not only can you ingest into the data lake of Azure Sentinel and then export after a while to a cloud storage, or even what they did in that particular scenario is that some of the logs are not going to Azure Log Analytics data lake for Sentinel. They're going directly to ADX. So think about the data which is not used for any detection, rarely used for any hunting, and maybe has only a value for compliance. Why would you store it into a hot storage? You can put it into a warm or even colder storage. So that's the benefit of working on this complex situation, is that we got clarity on how we can now help every customer on the planet to optimize their cost.
Thanks, Cyril. We've got a couple minutes left, so I'm not sure if we've got time for the Q&A, but please do feel free to reach out to us. Here are our details. You can send us an email or connect with us on LinkedIn. I think just to summarize everything, there's a few key areas just to take away. One of them being managing the costs. So as we know, on premises is no longer cost effective. So there is a need to move to a cloud native approach. with Azure Sentinel, but also working with a partner. I think that can help you to manage those costs and create customized solutions to be able to manage those costs as well. Making sure that you've got an agile risk-based use case management process in place. The partner can help you to do that, and particularly, help you to put in a process and manage that as an extra resource. So do think about how you customize those use cases continuously. Make sure they're aligned to your top risk, which can be quite a complex initiative to undertake. But working with a partner like Cyberproof hopefully can help you to do that. Also, make sure that you are optimizing those costs by looking at exactly where the most important logs can go into Sentinel, whereas some of the less relevant information can be stored. Also, having a log storage solution like ADX, blob storage, or something else to be able to run queries on that data and investigate that data even further. So think about how you're going to manage those costs and where perhaps, and you can work with Microsoft and a partner to help you manage that. And then finally, think about the people requirements and what's needed in terms of migrating from on-premise to the cloud. Often having a solution like Cyberproof Defense Center can help you to manage multiple seats at the same time as well. Over to you, Laura. I don't know if you've got any questions from the audience that you want us to answer, but I think we've covered most things now.
Great. I think we're good. I think we've answered things in the chat window, but a big thank you to Ben, Jamin, and Cyril. What a great webinar today. And thank you to everyone who joined us. This will conclude today's webinar.